It's Saturday morning somewhere, and like on Saturday morning where our discussion group has met at Panera Bread in Brookfield and continues to meet at Panera Bread in Brookfield for a year and a half, let's say, a year and a half or so, we're going to do a Panera Soup in Brookfield live show, although not on scene. It's at the Comcast studio. And you might have noticed in front of me a book. It's titled, it's by Bernie Sanders. It's entitled Our Revolution. And that's what we've been talking about for a year and a half. We focused on issues. We focused on not two candidates that hurl insults at one another. We've been talking about a candidate and a movement which didn't die in July, which continues on and will continue on into the next election. And actually, it'll continue on until tomorrow, every day going forward. We've got a great group of people, and if you could switch to camera 2, thank you. I will introduce them, and then we're going to start our normal Saturday morning discussion. Cindy.
Hello.
You know this guy in the back, Mark Muresh.
We're streaming live.
Streaming live.
Technological breakthrough.
Yay.
Don Groff, Henry Pietras, and Jeff Marcus of, you might know the name Marcus from other members of the Marcus family in the area, but like the other members of the Marcus family, this guy is very politically active. Neil Marcus, his brother, is your brother, right?
Yes.
Is your brother, is an attorney, does a lot of great stuff, and in that fashion, Jeff Marcus is right there, not after, not before, but parallel to, and here we are. So, without further ado, who gets the microphone first? What we do on Saturday morning is we pass the microphone around, and each of us has 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes to talk, what's on our minds, and then we just back and forth, and we all respectfully give each other a chance to interject something. And who gets it first?
I'll do it.
Henry Pietras, thank you. Go ahead.
We started the Bernie group sometime around July, end of July of last year. And as a consequence, we've been meeting every Saturday morning at Brookfield Panera from 9 to 11. And we usually get anywhere between 6 to 10 people coming in, and it's an ongoing conversation, trying to bring people into the conversation. Now, after Bernie lost the primary, they created, even slightly before, they created a website called Our Revolution. And let me just tell you what Our Revolution is about. There's 3 very simple goals. The first one is to get as many people involved in the process as possible. The second is to get as many people to stand up for office as possible. And if you're not going to stand up for office, then mentor the person or work for them, help them succeed in their effort. And the third piece has to do with education, and it's to educate our people we talk with about the issues, something that the media fails to do. We're very aware that the media is not serving us at this point in time, and we're trying very hard to engage everyone, one person at a time. Anyone wants to add?
Yeah. Revolutions, by their very nature, are disruptive, and the public ordinarily objects to them. Yet, revolutions can be creative at the same time. And one of the elements that the prior speaker made reference to was education. And I think that education in matters of government, in matters of labor, in matters of civil strife, are largely local, and if we can ignore them, more the better. It took a long time before black people mattered. It took a long time, even longer time, before the women vote was finally agreed to. And so revolutions can go on for years and years, And the revolution I urge is the revolution in education. Years ago, I think every high school taught civics and may have had field trips to Washington, dramas in their own schools where debates may have been held, where votes even may have been held. Wouldn't it be nice if the public fully understood the difference between capitalism, communism, socialism? And it seems to me that in the last several years, we've witnessed a gross ignorance of what a social democrat could be. And so I recommend careful selection of those who would teach or expose students to the processes of government, of dealing with the pressure groups such as labor unions or special interests. Additionally, I would urge a tolerance for such disruption. Secondly, in addition to education,
We'll get back to you. Who's next?
please do.
Here, go ahead, Jack.
Hi. It's very interesting that I guess a year and a half ago, when Henry and I sat down and he introduced me to Bernie Sanders as a candidate for the Democratic nomination, and I was very impressed with the platform, the integrity, the core beliefs that were being talked about by this gentleman whose years of experience and really understood the issues and how to correct some of these problems. He seemed to be the most organized, and so with that, Henry inspired me to start learning more about the process of, becoming active in the election process. I mean, I've really only done it on a local level up till now, and more or less watched the national scene without feeling very inspired to act towards it or on behalf of it. So when we started to do this group and we started to develop, we worked actively on the primaries. We started to realize that the revolution was because there was a lot of unrest in our society at the moment. And I think this election really points out that there's a social dichotomy that's going on. And still to this day, I believe that what the election has taught us, or the results have taught us, is that we've got to embrace this change, that the people have really spoken to try to change government. And one of the things that Bernie Sanders thought was critical to this process was to basically remove the money and the special interests. And now you hear both sides talking about that as well. They've adopted a lot of his ideas. So I'm encouraged that maybe we've come to a crossroads and that this election has started to lead us in that direction.
How did this process broaden your horizons? You talked about how you used to be active but on the local level. How did this whole process broaden? Did it broaden your horizons? And if so, how did it broaden your horizons to a more national focus on America?
That is primarily, I can credit to the group as we got together and the individuals that sat around our Saturday morning had so much experience and knowledge about the history of the elections, how things really fit together. And I think I learned as much during that process, and I credit it to the people that were involved in that Saturday conversation. So I was getting a good education.
A lot of fun along the way. Cindy, what brought you to where you are now? How did your evolution take place when this whole thing began to unfold a year and a half, 2 years ago?
Bernie appealed to me. I knew of Bernie before. I had seen him speak on the news, so I had some understanding of who he was, and he always seemed to be speaking about issues. And what my appeal to Bernie is his integrity and his character. So when I first learned that there was an event happening in Bethel, I went to it, and then somewhere along the line I connected with Henry and came. But Bernie is a person who represents honesty and integrity, and he's the populist candidate. So what happened in this election is that Donald Trump became the populist of the other side, and being an active burner throughout this whole process. I went up to New Hampshire. I was in Massachusetts doing the canvassing. So I felt such a strong kinship to him, and then what happened in those primaries, to have really witnessed how he did not get the nomination, but he was the populist candidate to people who understood what he represented, unlike Donald Trump. So you got into the issue of the negative with the two candidates rather than the positive. So Bernie's integrity and character is what has appealed to me throughout this whole thing.
Well, we got a guy that's kind of skulking around the room here.
I'm skulking with the live stream.
We've got a live stream, which is, well, this is live, but that's I guess a live stream is even liver.
Onto the Facebook world we go, something a little bit new. For me, I'm going to piggyback off of what Cindy said. And for me, I swore I'd never get involved in politics until there was somebody who had some semblance of compassion. And that's the thing that, for me, really is everything about Bernie. And it's interesting, in some way, Trump winning has made Bernie into Super Bernie, because everybody wants to talk with him now. He's on all the news programs that he could have been on a year ago, and he'd be president right now. And I want to cry every time I think about that. But now everyone wants to hear what he has to say, and there's lots of debate out there over, him saying Schumer should be minority leader, or this or that, or that Trump shouldn't prosecute Hillary. And at the end of the day, the compassion and the decades of fighting for the people stand out. And I guess this is my moment for every single person that I've been battling on Facebook this week who says that Bernie was sheepdogging people for the Democratic Party. You don't sheepdog people to the establishment by talking about billionaires and taking down the 1% and getting education and ending private prisons. You just don't do it. Because if you are, you're a really, really dumb person. And that's not what it is. So I believe in what he's doing. I don't have to agree with all of it. I will forever be disappointed that he didn't found a third party. Maybe he still will, but that will be forever my big disappointment with Bernie. But other than that, I believe in what he's doing.
Perhaps that's up to us to start a third party, and he is giving us that latitude. You define yourself a little bit as an outsider, not having really been politically active for most of your life, if not all of it. Don Groff, you've been a bit of an outsider. I've known you for a long time, and I take you as being somewhat of a libertarian in bent. How does that fit into this whole thing? How do libertarians and progressives, how does it all work?
Yeah, Dr. Groff. From
Western Connecticut State University, an illustrious career.
Yeah, how does it all work? Friends of mine who are libertarian seem to be very much tied into standard practices, perhaps legal practices. But a progressive, I think, there's a moral bent, I think, in most progressives that I know. And additionally, many of the progressive I know have gone through stress, have had to struggle. And libertarians they know the way, they have the answer. That's well defined. Progressives are en route. They're on the road somewhere. They're looking for the answer. And it seems to me that Bernie is perhaps a model example of a real progressive, and one that's liberal and one that's generous. Not to give away the store, but to be generous not only with policy, but with resources. Now, it seems to me that here's a distinct difference between them. And expressing that is very often a problem. In many states, in many locations, there are efforts to prevent the expression of your liberal views or even your libertarian views. And so part of my effort here and elsewhere is to see that everyone has a chance to vote. In many states, mechanisms have been created by schedule, by location, the absence of transportation, to prevent certain parts of the population from voting. And I would like to see methods whereby a vote can be conveyed, if not electronically, if not in person, perhaps by telephone, perhaps by paper, written, mailed, as they do the military or folks overseas. I would like to know that everyone, liberal, libertarian, progressive, whatever, Democrat, Republican, can vote. Extend the voting periods, and be very tolerant of the schedule of those who have the right to cast a vote. That is one of the features that I think political parties bent on success, bent on damaging their opposition, treating their opposition like enemies, not opponents. This is what I think, and I think we've seen it in this recent election. I don't know if that answers your question.
That's a pretty good answer.
I hope so.
Okay, now Jeff said that Henry got him started on a lot of this and kind of piqued his interest in the whole process and the issues. Okay. Okay.
Close to 30 years, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
But on a national level, perhaps more recently, Henry, what got you involved in all this? What piqued your interest? When did you start thinking about stuff and becoming involved? And
Well, Jeff and I have had conversations about politics forever. I mean, at Marcus Dairy, we'd sit down almost a number of early mornings and we'd talk over coffee for years. So we remember a number of...
and the ice cream cones were
elections.
apparently a lot better than the one we're passing
Yeah.
around.
But on Bernie, what got me interested is around when he announced, I started reading the New York Times and articles online, but specifically I started reading the reader comments. And there were, in one case, there were over 800 reader comments. And I was just unbelievably impressed with, with the article, because the article trashed Bernie, but it was the pushback that people offered in response to the article. And, you know, at the end of the day, I was crying. My daughter saw me because I was doing this at Three Brothers Diner, and she saw me crying. I mean, it's the first time I ever did that in front of her. So going forward, his platform, the way he behaved, the way he expressed himself, was spot on. I think the platform that he offered is still good. Even though the election is over, the issues are still here. And I'll go back into my little line, which I keep trying to get across to my friends at Brookfield Panera. Now, by the way, we call ourselves the Therapy for Political People, because we all need it.
TPP, therapy for political people.
Yep.
So now, even though someone else won the presidency, I think the issues are still with us. So we're looking at it from the viewpoint of ignore the messenger, ignore the messages which tend to be twisted, and every day they change. Let's focus on the issues, and then, as a test, focus on the doing, which is key. And we can get into what kinds of things we've done, but one, for myself and Cindy, and others at our table, we're getting involved with local politics. Cindy was very much involved in defeating Panda in New Milford. I'm getting involved in clean energy, both at Brookfield level as well as the state level. And Jeff and I yesterday participated in trying to give some feedback to the YMCA, who are building a building, but they really haven't thought about clean energy, and we put some possibilities on the table for them. And the contractor was willing to listen, and they will pursue some of the things that we suggested. So, we can do a lot of little things, but I think in the big picture, I think we're moving things forward. And the big thing is to get involved, both on the local politics level and also outside. We have a network now because of Bernie, statewide. We can call on resources that we never had available before, and we can easily reach out to people for Brookfield, for instance, and ask about process and how to get things done in the most expedient way possible. So there's a lot of good stuff. I know everybody's anxious to talk, but I want to emphasize what Dr. Groff said about education. I think I amplify the education piece in the sense that, number one, it is the foundation upon which all other professions are built. So for us to walk away from education, it would be inexcusable, because education is an investment in our future. And yes, it may cost money, but I think it's an investment, not in our children's futures, but also in our better future. So,
Is there a liberal arts component in every field of study?
I think so. I think the one thing that we want to bring as a consequence of education is critical thinkers. I think this is where, in this election, I think this is what got lost, the critical thinking. When you look at the behavior and what people said, and then you look at what the outcome was, I think we bought into the hype or the marketing. But when you look under the covers, right now, there's quicksand. There's not a lot of things we can hang on to, okay? For me, when Mr. Trump won the election, I felt like my feet and my legs got cut under from me, because, the things that I care about, which is science and reason and fairness, don't appear to matter.
I was with you that night. I saw the look on your face, and it was a very stunned look. On to the issues, because the issues are what we're built on. But continue.
Let me just finish.
Continue.
This
Yes.
one idea, and it came to me yesterday, which is that I had a discussion with a gentleman who was very much pro-business, and we got onto science, and he started making science into a belief system. And to me, science, the wonderful thing about science, and I'm paraphrasing, is that it's true, whether you believe in it or not, okay? And by the way, any belief system other than science has a built-in allowance for being wrong. That's the only belief system I know of that allows for being wrong, okay? And if you're wrong, then, okay, all right, I learned my lesson, let's try again. Okay, that's what science is about. And by the way, if scientists lie about their data and people can't reproduce their data, they're no longer in that business very quickly, okay? Science is about honesty. And I think that's what we need to push. I think that when people start putting out belief systems based on anything other than facts and evidence, I think we need to challenge them. You know, anytime someone makes a statement and, you know, they expect us to buy into it, we need to challenge them on, you know, where's your evidence? Yeah.
I would make a note of the fact that Progressive Soup did not come up on the list of fake news sites that's being passed around the internet. We are real. We are legit.
We're not a fake news site.
And sadly, some of the media take arguments opposite science. And is the public adequately trained to accept the science from those who continue to rise in their own field, continue to do research, continue to corroborate such things as climate change? And so there are those who push back against science. I think the media has the responsibility to find alternate speakers, yes, but even alternate speakers that would tend to support the scientific approach.
May I just add to that? The thing about science is that if someone says, like Dr. Groff just mentioned, you know, climate change is a hoax, okay? If someone makes that statement, then it's our duty to say, where's your evidence, okay? The reason that 97% of the scientists buy into this idea of climate change is because the evidence is there and it's peer-reviewed by people in the business. If you dismiss it as I don't believe it, then it's your duty not just to say I don't buy into it, but you have to put up the evidence. You have to do the hard work, okay? It's no, you know, you can't just slide by saying I don't buy into it. Yes, there's people out there who still believe that the earth is flat, contrary to the evidence.
Hollow.
Okay? So, I mean, it's a very simple experiment. If you send something up into space above the earth, you can see that the earth is round. Okay? Also, if you start from point B and go west or east, at some point in time, you'll end up back to where you started, assuming that you have a good compass. But the reality is that if you're going to continue to deny things in light of the evidence, then I think at some point you need to be dismissed as not being serious about the conversation. And I think in a way the media has not served us because they're not challenging people. They put out people who put out stuff that has been discredited, and they allow it to be repeated and repeated over and over and over. And I think it's up to us as citizens to push back.
And that's be it science or things going on with the election, things about where did the WikiLeaks emails come from? Really, oh, it's Russia. Everything was the fault of Russia. Everything. It's Russia. It's the infinite number of Russian bears typing in an infinite number of typewriters. And that's the thing, is the critical thinking in education, in science, in civics, it all comes down to needing to question. Frankly, at this point, we've learned in this election that we need to question absolutely everything that comes out of mainstream media. Since the majority of things are owned by 6 media companies, we know that they have an agenda. And Walter Cronkite is rolling in his grave and will eventually come back as a zombie and kill them all.
That's a pleasant thought. Tell us about Panda.
Oh, well, I was just going to continue to talk about mainstream media and,
Yeah.
and the misinformation that's out there, and along with Monsanto, who is doing a lot of damage and gives out misinformation. So the issue of the individual really doing the due diligence to read, to question, and to look at the information and not be misled is so significant. So Panda. So Panda was a natural gas plant that wanted to come into New Milford. So there was such a response by the townspeople that the mayor has now rescinded. He said he's not going to do it. But that was, again, the townspeople were so strong in doing their due diligence, and there were 4 forums where the two people from Panda were presenting. I attended 2 of them. They did not answer the questions that were asked by the people who had done their work. So I think the mayor was really wise to understand that this was not a good economic plan. He chose wisely, but I also feel that he did some damage to his own credibility by taking it on the way he did. So I hope that's not the case. Yeah, Panda was a plant that was going to come in. It was going to be 500. It was going to produce 550 megawatts of energy. There would have been a lot of emissions, a lot of negative things going into the air. So the people said no. That's the deal on Panda.
Did anybody ask them how much cha-ching they spent coming up with the name Panda? Because I mean, seemed like that was the crux of
They did.
the crux of the whole thing. How could anybody say no to anything named Panda? Oh my God, it had to be good.
Well, that is true. You are right, because they in their presentation, they did identify why they chose the name Panda, and it was because of love and goodness, and so there was, it was actually a investment group. There was 2 people, I don't remember their names, who were presented as the founders of it, but it was an investment group, and they initially said that it was the teacher's retirement, the fireman's retirement, but someone else said that it was the big banks and it was all those big businesses that were funding it. But you are correct, because they did a PR.
Yeah. Is it okay to say bullshit on television? Oh, I guess I just did.
Here, yeah.
Cuddly smokestacks.
Yes.
Cuddly. Oh my God! And they could have had little kids out doing crayon work and on the outside of the buildings, right underneath the barbed wire. It is yours to discuss.
Okay.
Tell us more. Tell us more about your background in local politics.
I guess it started with just a social consciousness that was, again, expressed at a local level, local causes that I thought were important and I could have an impact on. But it began to bother me when I started to see how the media and how the agendas in the political processes that were going on were all pretty much determined by who spoke the loudest, who had the most funding, and that was driving the issues more than facts. We live in a society where everyone's opinions are heard because of social media, but they're not always accurate. So doing the due diligence becomes a lot more important. I just had that conversation with my son this week, and he asked, what is meant by due diligence, and I said it could mean anything from a business exploring the facts to a social issue, exploring the facts to see what's true and what's not true. There were articles I remember reading that psychologists said during the debates that even though a candidate would go up and say something that was untrue, people believed what they wanted to believe. So hearing it became, reinforcement that, boy, that's got to be true, even if it was inaccurate. So I guess my crusade was to try to improve the system where we could start to learn more about issues, change democracy to dealing with the cause of what we need to fix in our society, not the personal interests that were driving it. I mean, we have a great political system, but politics has changed over the years from an art of compromise to a battle between who's got the biggest clout. And so I think we all suffer because of that, because there's swings back and forth. You go from, a conservative to a liberal, control of Congress, and those things, they're not working together for the better good. And that's what sort of encouraged me more and more over the years. And I think, Henry and I always had that social consciousness discussion. And so it developed into what's happening on the national scene.
What are the words conservative and liberal really mean, and have they changed over the years? What do they really mean?
Oh, I think they definitely changed that. The democratic liberal philosophy, in my mind, while it speaks to the better good, has started to pander more to an elitist interest than to look at the overall benefit that really needs to be addressed. And the conservatives probably the same direction. They've become ideologic monikers rather than trying to fix a problem through you can have different answers for the same question, but it shouldn't be about having the absolute answers. I guess there's more to it than that. I don't know, who else wants to comment?
I would love to. Because this is kind of why socialism became huge in the 1920s under Eugene Debs, because they were the party of the workers. And when you're talking about the workers, you're not talking about left or right, you're not talking about conservative, liberal, you're not talking about Republican, Democrat, you're talking about an issue that really comes into play for the people. And that's why Debs was able to get, 6% of the vote in 1916. It's why he was able to get 1 million votes running from a prison cell, because everyone believed in workers' rights, which led to Social Security, led to ending child labor practices that were horrible, led to the strength of the labor unions. And unfortunately, when he died, there was no one charismatic enough to pick up that void. Norman Thomas just wasn't that person. And then World War II came in and everyone was focused on fascism and everyone forgot about the workers. We're kind of at that same point now where everyone's fighting, should Trump be president? Should we get rid of the Electoral College, the left, the right? And this divide is building. And in some way, what needs to happen is we need a party of the working class. Forget the left-right aspect of it. Just throw it back to, it's the 99% that Bernie's talking about, that Occupy was talking about. It's bringing it back to all of us groundlings who are not the elite. And get rid of that, the conservative liberal, we're on two sides. Oh, you voted for Trump. Oh, you didn't. Oh, the half of the country who didn't vote. And we need to band together. And the only way we're going to do that is under an issue. And we're all working class, one way or another.
Now, this may not matter as much, it may not ring as true to a vegan like yourself, but bread and butter issues.
Bread and margarine, or bread and puppet. Let's give a shout out to Street Theater. And
Yeah, I would also agree in terms of, just going back to this election about the we the people, in terms of the populists who didn't feel that their voice was heard, so that's why they went for Trump. But in terms of what Mark was saying, maybe you want to talk more about Eugene Debs. Debs, you should explain who he is.
oh, do I want to talk more about Eugene Debs? Yeah, that's well. Here, actually, let's do this, because if anybody watched the George Washington University talk that Bernie gave the other night, the speech and then the talk afterwards, there was a question, I guess, from a student who said, if Bernie, if you were stranded on a desert island, what 3 politicians would you want to be stranded with? And it got a laugh, and he says, the first one that I'd want to be stranded with is Eugene V. Debs, who was a union organizer in the late 1800s, eventually became the candidate of the Socialist Party and ran for president, I believe, 6 times. 6% in 1916, which is when Teddy Roosevelt, big old quote-unquote progressive hero, which he's not, decided to, he didn't get the Republican nominee, which of course at the time was what we think of as Democrats. Let's remember that it swapped somewhere. So Roosevelt split the party because Taft got the nomination, which allowed Woodrow Wilson to become president. And I have to wonder if part of Bernie's unwillingness to run as third party this time was him being a student of history. Seeing what happened in 1916, Wilson became president when Roosevelt and Taft split the vote. Debs got 6%. He was essentially the third party. It wasn't enough to affect anything. But then Wilson, who ran on the promise of not getting us into World War I, completely flipped after the election and launched us into World War I. And there's a whole other long story behind that, but it was the corporations who raised a bunch of money to buy munitions and convinced Wilson, hey, you raised all this money, now spend it on us and buying weapons to get into World War I. Debs was anti-war without a doubt, and he stood there and said, I am not the one to lead you out of the bondage of capitalism, because if I can lead you out of it, someone can lead you back in. And that sounds very familiar, because that's completely what Bernie translated into not me, us. It's completely a repackaging of his idol, Eugene Debs. I hear that there's quite the picture of Debs in Bernie's office up in Burlington, Vermont.
You were there, you saw it, right?
I was outside. They didn't let me into his little office, so I don't know. But that's what they say, that there's a picture of Debs amongst other things. I mean, he recorded an album of spoken word of Debs' speeches back in the 70s. I mean, he did a whole documentary on Debs. I mean, that's how much he believes in him. And so Debs looked at people as saying, you need to do this. You need to stand up. You need to work together, and you need to get, if you're doing the work, you need the fruit of the labor, not capitalism. You make the tools. You wield the tools. You need the fruit of your labor. And it's amazing how the word socialism has been condemned, mostly from the real far right in this day and age. But all socialism meant in America in the 20s was working class people. And that's really what should come back. Oh, hey, pass it around.
I interpret socialism a little differently. I just say, anytime someone says socialism, I say common good. And I think personally that even though anyone who takes an oath of office, one of the first sentences in the oath of office is that you promise to work for the common good. And unfortunately, in my view, what I've seen lately is that over 30 to 40 years, we've drifted away from the common good more towards the me's. And personally, if you look at it as a spectrum where you have common good on the extreme and you have the me's on the left, personally, I think the me's have fallen off the cliff. And I think I would like to see a balance, like anything else. I'd like to see a balance between the common good and the us and the me's, simply because if the common or us win, everybody else wins as well. I think the other way, if a me wins, it doesn't mean that it will trickle down, contrary to the Reagan saying, because that's been refuted, by the way. Yes. And by the way, we've also had that experiment since 2001 by lowering the taxes and so on, and that hasn't really helped us, helped us much. So that's, at this point, that's all I got. Oh, one other thing. Mark referred to, well, along with what Mark said about Trump and Hillary, if Trump and Hillary were stranded on an island, who wins?
There are many.
All of us.
Well, exactly.
All of us.
Exactly. America wins. Okay.
Good point. Yeah, I think we've pointed out that socialism really is a future we can believe in.
Well, you're probably the only one here that's older than me, Don. So you might have actually owned, or at least seen, or at least heard about Ford Motor Company and the Model A and Model T and okay. And I'm thinking about what. Tell us about. Now, Henry Ford was no angel. Henry Ford had police come in and beat up people and kill people, but at the same time, he understood the overarching rationale behind. Go ahead, tell us about it. About ownership of Fords and their workers.
Yes, he made sure that his employees could afford the vehicles he was manufacturing. And I think that that's credit to management and a recognition that rewards to the workers are important and they must be adequate to meet not only their need but the proper circulation of currency.
The faster money moves, the more good it does.
Exactly.
I just wanted to get back to this common good idea, in the sense that Mark mentioned that Bernie was at George Washington University 2 days ago, and unfortunately the transmission was not very good. But I watched it a couple of times, so I got the gist of it. And basically, Bernie is saying, like he did in the campaign after he lost to Hillary, he focused on the issues. He didn't necessarily, praised Hillary up to, to the skies. He focused on the issues, and this is what we have an agreement. Let's move forward. He did the same thing with 2 days ago at his speech. Basically, he said, here are the areas of agreement with Mr. Trump. Okay? Mr. Trump said, okay, he said he's not going to change Social Security. He's not going to change Medicare and Medicaid. Let's hold him to it. He said $10 an hour minimum wage. Okay, that's not what I wanted, but I wanted 15. But let's hold him to it. Okay, it's a step in the right direction. So, in essence, what he said is, to the extent that Mr. Trump is supporting the agenda that is on Bernie's platform, we'll work with him. To the extent that he is against that platform, like climate change, for instance, then we make our voices heard. Let's watch what he does and then, act appropriately.
Trump and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, because we know that Trump
Absolutely.
said he was against it.
Yeah.
Well, it's dead now.
And by the way,
but
Bernie
it's-
people got
could
very
be-
much
could be
involved
renewed.
with Elizabeth Esty, and she ultimately ended up declaring that she was against the TPP. So, because of Bernie people getting involved, because of not that many people getting involved, when you look at all the possible voters in this county, she was listening, and and we got her to move in the right direction as far as we're concerned.
Incremental improvements.
Yes.
And pressure from us.
In regards to the TPP, yes, Trump has said, at this point in time, the TPP is dead because it's
Dormant.
it's dormant. That doesn't mean that Trump isn't going to do other initiatives, and I guess the Keystone or pipelines like that. So yes, we don't know what he's going to do, but at this point, the TPP is not it's not something that's happening with the lame duck with Obama.
I think Elizabeth Esty was expecting to run for governor anyway when Malloy went up into Hillary's cabinet. So there's some disappointed Democrats in our local area. Sizzle. Oh, back to me? I made silence happen with my comment about our local politicians.
Passing the baton.
One of the other interesting issues that was raised that I think I've heard the Republican, our president-elect, speak about was election reform, which I certainly embrace his ideas to reform the way that campaigns. He's talking term limits, which may or may not discourage, I don't know if it's going to help or not to have a limit to how long someone can serve. But obviously, the way the campaigns are funded, the the reliance of candidates to raise money once they're in office. If we can control that and get it down to, where we're electing people not on what financial backing they've acquired or can acquire, but on what they really believe in, it would give them more time to focus on the issues, and we might have some more independent thinking politicians in both parties. Because I think what the Democrats gave us in this last election was they wanted to control that process. I mean, the superdelegate control over the primary was a big mistake, I think, which ultimately led to part of their demise. And so there's a hope that some reform will come in this next administration. And I think the message was sent. Now it's a question of how we continue to encourage that message to cause this change.
Influence the change.
Well, I'm the election protection guy in the crowd here, and not just to my friends here at the table, but to folks that are watching. We have something called election protection, and a good friend of mine named Luther Weeks is in charge of that. We've been doing that since 2006, I believe, where a statistically relevant percentage of elections in Connecticut are recounted. Now, fortunately, we have in Connecticut, we have paper ballots. You fill out the paper ballot, you mark your dots, you put it in the machine counts it. But just to be absolutely sure that the machines are reliable and haven't been tampered and can't be tampered, we have a limited number. It's 5% of the towns have one race that's recounted, hand counted, where we take the marked ballots and volunteers come in and recount the votes in that particular race in that particular town. Now, why is that important? Well, it encourages people to believe that their ballots are being counted, that their vote counts. A lot of states, you don't have that. A lot of states, you have it's very different than when you go to the ATM and you take out $100. You expect to get a physical record of your transaction. A lot of states don't have that in their elections. And people would be very upset if they went to the ATM and took out $100 or even $20 and there was no record, no paper record of them doing that. Well, Connecticut, we handle that a little differently. All states should, we do. And I've been through a lot of these recounts, and it's a marvelous thing. I encourage people to come out and participate. Not even if they don't want to sit there and count paper ballots and count dots for 3 or 4 hours. They can sit and watch democracy at work and watch. That'll be coming up pretty soon. And if you Google Election Protection Connecticut, if you Google Luther Weeks, there's a lot of ways of finding out information about that and how to actively participate in a recount, or just watch, just passively participate and elevate your own belief that our elections in Connecticut are run properly, and to try to push that on other states. Next.
Yes, I participated in one of those recounts, and I participated as a member of one political party, and I worked from a pile of ballots that me and my partner and I went through. My partner was from the opposite political party. And incidentally, a lawyer was behind us, I guess just to oversee the process. But it was, whatever we came up with, well documented, the effect or the outcome of that particular election. I was impressed by it. I was in stress by it because of all the ballots you have to count. Wow, and you're pushed to finish as quickly as possible. but it is something that brings credibility to the process. Thank you, Dave.
Didn't we mention last week that the folks who make the receipt printers for ATMs are also the ones who make voting machines? So why can't we get receipts out of both?
It's is that Diebold or Diebold? Well, you know, yeah, I know, but die as in trying to kill off the political process, kill off the process for free elections in America.
If Stop and Shop can give me a receipt the length of my arm, I should be able to get something out of a voting machine.
To switch subjects on you, one of the things I'm thinking about, and that's because of our friend Robert Garival, we've had some...
Pete's brother.
We had a discussion with him this morning about this idea of doing tabling. And we've had a lot of experience with tabling and canvassing and honk and waves and so on. And the idea is to do a canvas or a table, let's say at the DMV or someplace, to cheer for America's success.
Cheer for America's success. I
And
think
I'm
we're all
open to
all in for that.
Okay, as to how to go about it, but it's just, you know, there's a lot of issues that people agree on. It's, you know, let's not put ourselves into boxes of some political party, but think about the issues and see where we can agree and move forward. If we can agree on, you know, what's going on with climate and take some action there, let's do it. By the way, there's an auto show tomorrow with electric cars in Hartford.
It's a lot of fun to
Yeah.
get out in the fresh air or indoors even and just mingle with people and engage and find out that we all have an awful lot of agreement on an awful lot of subjects. So we don't really need to spend too much time arguing about things we disagree on.
It's about having a respectful conversation with people. Granted, sometimes I get a little annoyed with some of the things that people hold, but overall, I think it's about having a good conversation. And by the way, some of us have been learning about how to do that because there's an outstanding TED Talk about how to have a really, really good conversation I shared with some of us.
The conversation continues. We're going to continue our conversation here, and we'll continue it tomorrow morning and every Saturday morning at Panera Bread in Brookfield. Come join us. Put in your 2 cents. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk. Let's engage and in respectful conversation. And we're going to continue on talking, I'm sure, long after the camera fades on our hour special, into tomorrow, into the following Saturday. You're all invited. Disagree, agree. We'll find some stuff.